So it's morning here. That's why people are not live yet. I think they're still sleeping. But nonetheless,
They're joining in. I can see them.
now, man,
Good
thank you
morning,
for
everyone.
joining. So can you please introduce yourself to those who just came now?
Sure, I'm Brendan Bradley. I'm an actor in over 100 TV shows, movies,
Sure.
video games, and commercials. And I kind of represent the actor, writer, director, producer that most people don't know. I'm not a celebrity. I'm not a millionaire. I'm just what I call a jobber, which is someone who works
I
from
see.
job to job to job, just making a
Makes
living
sense.
like the rest of us.
No, thank you for joining us. So it's clear that you know your stuff. So I can rest assured that by the end of this interview, my followers would have learned something. So can you start with the strike? What is actually happening? What are they striking about?
Sure, there's multiple strikes happening. So there's the writer's strike that's been going on for almost 100 days, and that's part of the writer's contract for TV and film with the
Sure.
major studios and networks in Los Angeles, New York, basically American content. And then the actor strike has been going on for almost 30 days. And these are contracts that are negotiated every 3 years. So this is not a
Ah,
surprise. This is not, no one was caught off guard. So we have over 100 contracts for all the different types of projects, whether there's radio, there's commercials, there's YouTube content, and the TV theatrical contract for TV and films. And that's all sorts of different budgets from Netflix to NBC to Mission Impossible, everything in between. They are negotiated every 3 years on this standard schedule, this standard cycle, and this was the summer that they were supposed to sit down and negotiate wage increases, new protections, conversations about streaming, conversations about residuals, conversations about AI. And the writers came with their list of demands, the producers came with their list of demands, and I think the most important thing to recognize is that this is not necessarily about the two
I see.
sides disagreeing. The one side is the AMPTP, which is the group that negotiates for the producers, and the other side is the
Sure.
WGA, which is the Writers Guild of America, that negotiates for the writers. And currently, the two sides are not talking. The AMPTP will not come to the table and meet with the writers to discuss, and that's been going on for 100 days. And for the writers, the AMPTP has not come to the table to
I
meet with the writers. So there were negotiations that were happening, and then the negotiations stopped. And so right now we're striking just to have a seat at the table to even discuss what both sides want.
Yeah. But that must be tragic. So what is the impact now on TV shows that are supposed to be written and what is actually happening there?
So it's a full work stoppage for TV and film for the writers, and that's been true for 100 days, which means that when we get into the
Sure.
fall and the winter, we'll stop seeing new projects come out because those projects have not been in development. So it's not
Ah,
immediate. We don't feel it
exactly.
immediately because of the cycle of creating content. We can't go live like we are right now and immediately, oh, something's wrong.
Sure.
But the actor shutdown does immediately cease
I
production of those projects. So filming has to stop immediately. And so that adds this extra immediacy to needing to actually
see.
come to the table and start having a
So in
conversation.
your earlier answer, I heard you said something about residuals. Can you explain that to the listeners?
Sure, residuals are a weird concept. It's part of what
Sure.
makes entertainment work. So obviously, if you had to pay me what Harrison Ford
Sure.
made for Star Wars, for every small movie that you've never watched, there would be no movies, there would be
Okay.
no entertainment. And so entertainment basically works in two forms of compensation. I get a very
Sure.
small base rate, which is honestly just a basic living wage. It's often close to minimum wage. And that base rate just covers, I'm going to
Okay.
go there for the day and I'm going to film. And this allows them to, at a very low level, not have to spend a lot of money to invest in a lot of different projects because we never
Sure.
know what's going to be a hit. But then when something is
Ah,
a hit and it gets
ah,
re-aired, every time it airs, it makes money. It's on TV, it makes commercials. It goes to the movie theater, there's box
okay.
office, there's DVDs, whatever it is. I participate in a very small way in every time
Ah,
they use that content
I
and make
see.
money off of it. And here's the other part of that. It diminishes over time. I don't make the same amount. So the first time it airs, I make a good amount. The second time it airs, make a little less, and then a little less, and then a little less. And so this allows the entire Hollywood ecosystem to create new content all the time, take risks, find new voices, new storytellers, because we don't know what's going to connect with the audience. And then what connects, what works, what is successful, it's profitable and everybody participates. So there's the base compensation and there's residual or royalties compensation, which is this basically based entirely on performance and success. I just participate in a small way in that
I see.
success.
No, that makes sense. Because I mean, when I was doing my research, I was seeing that you guys are no longer getting residual checks due to streaming services, you know. And so now I think
Correct.
also the issue is I was looking at some documents and statements made by like these big studios. They kept complaining or at least stating that the budgets are now smaller or people are no longer subscribing to the services. Also, the viewership has decreased. So it's like everybody's not having enough money. So if like the producers or the studios don't have enough money, then we can't pay you. But you guys are saying, but well, you can. There's enough money to be made for everybody.
Well, I think it comes down to how we quantify what is enough
Good point.
money, right? We look at the So you look at the streaming services, and maybe they aren't making money.
Sure.
I don't know. None of us actually can look at their numbers because they won't report
I
their
see.
numbers. So for the last 10 years, they've told investors, they've told the public that business is good, numbers are up, viewership is up. Now that we're sitting at negotiations, we're hearing viewership is down, numbers are down. That seems to be a different statement. But more importantly, we can look at their
Ah,
executive compensation. So we can
makes sense.
see the bonuses that were paid to their executives and their CEOs.
Makes
Those
sense.
are quite high. So it seems there is
Makes
money
sense.
from somewhere that is going to pay some people. And we're just asking, why can't the laborer, why can't the worker participate in wherever that money is coming from? Maybe that money isn't coming
Sure.
from the streaming service, but it seems like it would be. And this is an important conversation, just kind of differentiating. So since the 1960s, that's when we first
Indeed.
created the residual model. And the reason it was created was because of a strike. The WGA and the SAG-AFTRA struck for the
Sure.
first time together. This was one of their first strikes together. And through that, they negotiated a residual model to be able to participate in the success of projects. And then we've done that ever since. And so this is the first time since 1960, both these
I see.
unions have struck together, once again having this conversation about participating in the revenues that seem to be earned on the content, but don't seem to be
I
paid
see.
on the
Makes
content.
sense. So, what do you make of the argument made by people that as time and technology improves, also the way people consume content changes? Likewise. So, for example, when you look at the 2007 strike that happened, the writers are actually complaining about the DVDs and how the DVDs are being sold, you know. And so now
Mhm.
that was a change from network TV. And now streaming services have been, the main thing now. So what do you make of the argument that as time goes on, there's just change, like change is inevitable?
Change is inevitable, sure, and there will always
So,
be new storytelling technologies, right? Right now, we're having
sure,
this experience right now, where we're using a social media platform to have a
sure,
dialogue and a conversation and create product and entertainment and knowledge
sure.
for your viewers. I think the conversation becomes, I don't think the value ever
Okay,
changes. There might be different budgets, there might be different thresholds, but ultimately the value of whether that's scripted content or unscripted informational content, that is always important. And for thousands of years, we've told stories. We have monetized those stories. We have shared those stories. And so I come from the theater, and in the theater, you have to pay me to show up and do the show every night. So there's an immediacy baked in that if you stop paying me, I'll stop coming, and
makes
then there
sense.
won't be a show. And the question is, with these new technologies that allow transmitting the performance, it's actually a favor to the producers to be able to keep reusing the same
I
programming over and
see.
over and over again. And so just creating a model by which the artist can benefit from that and participate in that. For me, it really comes down to two conversations. The technology will always improve. We need a model that makes sense
Sure.
with whatever that technology is. And you can either pay me a lot upfront,
Sure.
and then never have to pay me again, but it's going to
Makes
be a
sense.
lot.
Makes sense.
And it probably then will
Makes
limit the amount of content you can make. Or if you don't do well, I don't do well. And so we'll all invest in the future and in the speculative
I
nature of the
see.
content.
But I must also say that the quality of writing over like this period has been not great, to say the least. Because I mean, honestly,
Is that true?
well, at least from how I look at it, because I mean, when I was doing my research, I saw that apparently the writer's room has been taken out of production. So in the olden days, what they would do, so to explain to my listeners, so there's actually four stages of making a show, guys. So the first one is the writer's room. So this is where people like Bradley actually write down the script. And then the second stage is production. This is where the actors, the producers actually act out the script. And then there's post-production. This is where you guys edit. Am I correct? So maybe you add voiceovers or whatever. And then the last stage is airing. So this is what we see on TV, the final product. So what I was reading was that the writer's room has been taken out of production. So people usually got experience from actually working in the field. So also you'd find that also the writing would change. So what you wrote in the writer's room doesn't necessarily work in production. And so you'd speak to the actor and the quality then, I at least I believe, was top notch. What do you think about that?
I mean, I think there's a lot to unpack there. I think there has always been the writing room and the kind of conversation around the writing room is the hope that you're training the next generation of writers to get experience, to be able to learn how to break story, how to work in the room, how to then work
So
in production and work in editing. And we've have denied that opportunity. But as far as, and this is the danger of the word quality,
makes
because in art, right, what you think is best
fair point.
quality could be different than what I think is best quality. But I think overall, when we look at the quality of the
Sure.
last decade, across the board, we've seen actually a lot of reporting that says that we've had a golden era of content, right? There's never been more
Makes
diversity,
fair
excitement,
point.
experimentation in storytelling content. And I think that we've seen incredible quality come out of this era. And instead, I think the question has been when we're talking about content, there's the diminishment
Sure.
of experience and access for certain writers and
Sure.
workers, which should change. I agree. But then we have also talked about some people say, well, there's all these
Make,
superhero movies and we're tired of it, or it's the same story over and over again.
I,
That's not about the
I see.
writer
I
or
see.
the artist. That's about the blockbuster model that we decided, oh, well, if you want to make 100 million or 100 billion in the movie theater, you
Makes
have to follow this
sense.
formula. But Barbie has shown us that that's not true, right? In 17 days, $1 billion from a rather avant-garde experimental film,
Sure.
yes, based off of a toy, but with a very independent flair and a lot of
Makes
controversial
sense.
talking
Makes
points
sense.
that people are actually really concerned about or having questions around. And so I would actually argue the quality has been going up and up and up. And really what we've been told is that the more you trust the artist, bring in new voices, bring in
Makes sense.
experimentation, bring in diversity, you actually will do better at the box office. The Black Panther showed that as well. It showed if you tell new stories, bring in new filmmakers, there are audiences that want to connect with new stories. It isn't just about, and a couple movies that happened last year, that Everything Everywhere All at Once,
Sure.
demonstrated that as well. not just in the awards season, but also in the box office as well, re-releasing back into theaters because it was so
No,
successful.
I guess that's fair when you break it down like that, when you bring in the diversity of voices. And so when you say that, I guess I see where you're coming from, you know. But coming back to the strike, so what do you think is the solution? Because I mean, if the AMPTP says they don't want to come to the table unless you guys, drop this core, values or demands. I mean, what's next? Because I mean, when I was doing my research, other people are like, this is the difference between buying a house or not, or, taking children to school or not. Because I mean, if you guys are not working now, you're not making money. But I mean, that doesn't take away from like the power or I mean, the importance of a strike. Because I mean, everybody is suffering technically, but I believe that it's the writers who are
Yes.
suffering more. So what's next, really?
Well, I think what's next is hopefully
Sure,
getting them to come to the table to just even have the negotiation, right? We can have a
sure,
deal that's bad for everybody or a deal that's good for everybody, but we have to discuss that deal. And ultimately, we have to work as partners, right? There's no
sure,
winners or losers here. We are all partners in creating entertainment product, which is one of the biggest exports of the US is entertainment culture. So this is a valuable
sure,
commodity. We all need to come together and collaborate to even create. And weren't the writers won't get everything that they want, the actors won't get everything that they want, the producers won't get everything that they want. That's how a
sure,
negotiation works. But when it comes to a pain point, I agree that in the short term, it's hard. But having your principles only matters when it's inconvenient, right? When your principles are tested,
sure.
that's when you know that they're principles. And so I think that everyone is really standing in the integrity of their principles right now to say, this is not a
Sure.
sustainable business model. This is doing more harm than good. And at this point in time, when we look at what is being presented, it isn't worth
Makes
creating more
sense.
product
Makes
for this
sense.
system. So until this system changes, there's no point in continuing to feed it if we're
Sure.
not going to be the beneficiaries of that. And in some ways, what I've really loved and been inspired by is hearing all the people talk about how the past strikes and the past movements and every past negotiation has opened the door
Sure.
for actors like me. Like I would not have the protections and the rights that I have today if
Sure.
others before me hadn't sacrificed. And I think that everyone, that's what parenting is, right? Is that our parents sacrifice
Sure.
for us to be able to have a better life. And that is what that's our charge right now, is that we are holding the door open
Makes
for the next generation of making sure that this is a sustainable and respectable career in the
no,
future.
that makes sense. Um, so I heard you speaking about systems. So what did you propose, like from this system now of streaming? So, because I mean, let me see my notes. But the middle person, should I say, the actors and the writers have essentially been taken out of the discussion in terms of how money is made. So you'll find that now it's just the big studios, the streaming services, and the end user, the consumer. So what do you propose then? What do you think should be done?
Well, if you go to
Sure,
sagaftrastrike.org, there's a grid where they show what the
sure,
Actors Guild proposed and what the
sure,
AMPTP responded. And similarly, there is one for the Writers Guild. And it goes point by point by point, and we would not
sure,
be able to get into
sure,
all of it tonight. But the core concepts to focus on um, seem to really fall around basic wages have not kept up with the
sure.
cost of living or inflation. It's actually something we have to negotiate for every 3 years, and we almost always don't get it. And so the value
Sure.
of a writer's salary has not only diminished in the amount of
Sure.
work weeks that they receive, but also the value of their contract is a quarter the value. It's 25% less than it used to be. So they've lost 25% buying power in their contracts over the
That,
last 10 years. And for the actors, it's roughly 14%. So it's not just even about like making, a little more money. It's about just trying to actually keep up with earning
Makes sense.
the value
Makes
of what we were earning 10 years ago. So that's the first priority, is just keeping up with the cost of inflation, keeping up with the cost of living to be able to just sustain. It's not even about raises. Then there's conversations about the business model of streaming was never
Sure.
intended to be the primary business model. It was supposed to be secondary, ancillary. So now that it has shifted to the primary business model, we need to keep up those protections and move to an economy that actually works. So because residuals were not a
Sure.
part of digital streaming, we need residuals to become a part of digital streaming. Otherwise, this is not a viable option, or they can pay the higher salaries up front, but they're not
Sure.
offering to do that either. And then there's all sorts of other small little negotiations that are just part of any contract period. For example, there are penalties in our contracts and fees in our contracts that haven't changed since the
What?
1930s. So yes, because we would get into negotiations and we say, you know what, let's not worry about that right
Sure.
now. We'll do it another year. And then we did it another year. And then we waited another year. And now here we are. And so there's all these small little ways in which we've
Sure.
compromised in the past. And at this point in time, there's nothing
Makes
left to
sense.
compromise on. We need some of these deal points to actually keep up with a
Sure.
2023 contract. Otherwise, this isn't really a viable industry.
No, makes sense. So last question. What do you think about this idea that writing now is seen as a gig job, like as you're doing a gig rather than a stable job?
I think that that's definitely a culture that is happening in a variety
Sure.
of sectors and industries, right? Is that in some ways, the model that has entered a lot of industries is this idea of a
Sure.
gig worker. Um, but that in effect is actually disingenuous because a gig worker is not an employee, and you are required by
Sure.
law, at least in the state of California, to treat your employees as employees. And so, in a lot of ways, it's not a job, it's not an
Makes
industry
sense.
if it's a gig. And some core things about how we define that, right? A gig is
Sure.
you tell me what you want me to do, and on my own time, on my own schedule,
Fair
I will
point.
deliver it to you. That isn't how writing works. That
Makes sense.
isn't how acting works. When I'm acting, I have to show up at a specific time, a specific place, do a specific thing. That's not a gig. That's a job. You're not okay if I roll in, even just doing this interview, right? Like you're
Sure.
not paying me. This isn't a gig
Sure.
per se. This isn't a job, but
Makes
you expected me to
sense.
be on time. You
Right.
expected me to be professional. You expect me to respect your
Sure.
audience. There's basic understandings. So I think that there's a desire. I understand the desire from an employer's perspective to say, is there a way I can pay less? Is there a way I can, demand more of my employees? There will always be that
Sure.
edge, I'm sure. But we have to ask ourselves, the language is important, and this isn't a gig, and therefore you can't be a gig worker. And so you need to treat employees like
Makes sense.
employees. Even though we have colloquially called it a gig, people call it an
Sure.
acting gig or a writing gig, but
Makes
it is a
sense.
job.
No, Rabi, thanks, man. But I think now can you go to the comments and see what people are saying? So,
Sure. Can I ask you, what is your favorite movie or TV show from the last year?
let's see. Good question. Um, hmm. Well, I wouldn't say it's from the last year, but I don't know if you know The Punisher. I think, yeah,
The Punisher, yeah.
proper. I mean, beautiful writing, acting. So it is for now. That's my favorite. Sure. What's
Okay,
your favorite?
great. And everyone can put it in the comments as well what your favorite thing is, just so we can celebrate some
Exactly.
writers and some
Exactly.
directors and some actors.
So somebody commented here saying that turning anything into a gig rather than a career over time, which is what we've seen everywhere, is exceptionally harmful to the working class. What do you think?
It is. I mean, I agree with that statement. I think that echoes a lot of this conversation that your desire may be to call it, well, you can call it whatever you want to call it, but that isn't actually creating a sustainable career, which also doesn't create a sustainable industry. Because at the end of the day, your workers are also customers. So if you don't pay your workers a living wage, I don't know how they make your product long term. And then I don't know how they buy your product in the future.
That makes sense. No, Papi, thank you for joining us. I feel like you've enlightened us. You've broke it down so beautifully. I feel like even the layperson, after watching our interview, would have understood what the issue is, what the solutions are. And so thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, and good morning to everyone. Enjoy the future for me.
Thank you.
Good night.
So guys, there you have it, man. Likewise, I'd like to thank Papi, for joining this live. He broke it down so beautifully, because what we wanted to do essentially was to call somebody who was experienced, somebody who actually worked in the industry or works in the industry. And so I believe that he broke it down so beautifully. And I'd like to extend my thanks again, for him for joining in. Thank you for joining this live. Those who woke up to join this live, that means a lot to me. Thank you, guys. Have a beautiful Tuesday. Enjoy your day, guys. Let's be productive, and peace from your host, Tumelo Shalele, the news anchor for Access News. Thank you, guys.